part of my remit is to work on spatial computing within the Enterprise Innovation Group, and we are just thrilled to be working with Apple on identifying and building real enterprise use cases for this technology. This is very different than traditional VR, XR headsets that we've all played with in the gaming front, and it is real jobs to be done. If I can quote my dear friend Clay Christensen, there's real business outcomes that could be had from this technology. So with that, great segue. I'm going to invite my panel up, which is going to be about spatial computing and immersive experiences. And with that, I'll invite my panelists up.
Hello.
So I hosted this panel last year, and things were very different. Apple had not announced the Vision Pro. So we were unable to really go any deep on it because we didn't know what was coming, but we projected what might be coming, and here we are now a year later, and it's been pretty amazing. I've actually played with the device myself. So I've got some luminaries in this space, spatial computing, VR, immersive, and I'm really honored to be hosting you guys today. So I'm going to ask the first question or topic to be discussed, and before you answer it or comment, just please give a brief introduction on yourselves, because your backgrounds are all just individually tremendous. So with that said, we kind of all know about virtual reality, which is wearing a headset and going completely digital into a virtual environment. We all know about augmented reality, which is where you hold your phone up to something and then a digital object comes into it, so you're mixing both, with mixed reality, perhaps XR. So with all that said, and now with Apple's announcement on the Vision Pro product, which sort of changed the game to a certain extent, we want to keep this focused on enterprise and not so much consumer gaming if we can. Like, what's changed in the last 12 months around this area? You folks have been in this probably for decades each, so we're really eager to hear about your perspective. So I'll start on my left.
Sure. Hi, I'm Joanna Popper. Thanks for hosting us. My background, I'm a media exec, spent time at places like NBC Universal, at Singularity University, we all met Salim yesterday, as well as was leading VR at HP, and most recently I was Chief Metaverse Officer at CAA, which is the big talent agency. I've also executive produced a lot of XR content as well that's gone to a lot of film festivals. And right now I'm advising a bunch of different interesting companies in this space. And I started my career early on as a consultant. I was at McKinsey and on Wall Street. So awesome. Shout out to all the consultants in the room. I was once one as well.
Recovering management consultant. We have a few of those here, I think.
I heard some other recovering consultants on the, I don't necessarily so much refer to myself as recovering, but.
All good, thank you.
It was a good time.
Thank you, welcome, Josh.
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me here. My name is Josh Rush. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Surreal Events. And as the name of our company implies, we started our company based on, right out of COVID. There was a huge gap, and we felt that, a lot of virtual event experiences were very passive, and they felt very flat, and it was hard to differentiate, who am I supposed to notice? When I come to an event like this, I've got visual cues, there's places for me to go, and a lot of the streaming technology that was out just wasn't allowing for that. So we built a spatial computing platform with tooling that would enable, clients, brands, agencies, partners to be able to come in and create hyper-realistic, web-based experiences, largely screen-based experiences, though we were device agnostic. And again, the whole idea was how do we enhance and extend what we do in real life and try and bring that to a time and a place where we couldn't actually get together. And that quickly, pivoted into, more of these immersive brand experiences. Everybody was trying to capitalize on, the upshot of gaming. But now the last 12, 18 months, most of our focus is on enterprise applications and where we see opportunities for, again, hyper-realism, 3D content, real-time content, and collaboration.
Awesome, thanks. Ted?
Hi, my name's Ted. For the last 15 or so years, I've had this ridiculous title called futurist at two big movie studios. So I effectively work in a pretend industry, the movie industry, and I have a pretend job in a pretend industry. And that's allowed me to do a lot of interesting exploration and learning and trying to bring that to the various teams that make movies and TV shows and games for big movie studios. I did it for Fox and I did it for Paramount. And I still do that to this day. I learn new things and try and experiment with new things, and I spent a tremendous amount of time in the Apple platform. Learned a lot about what it can do, what its capabilities are, where its value points are, and I'm very excited about the future of where that's going. I thought Mike gave a great sort of walkthrough. I was taking pictures of every slide. I was like, this is great, because as Richard and I were talking offline, a lot of the use case for these devices is when you try and simulate something you would do in the real world. And in the real world, there are physical objects and physical things and humans that react to them. Just like we're all on this stage and there's physical chairs and microphones and things and stuff. And when you deal with stuff in the real world and want to simulate that, a flat screen only gets you so far. So you want a spatial environment. It allows things to get better and be better. So that's what we're
Awesome.
sort of exploring.
So on the enterprise front, again, we all gaming and retail, there's huge opportunities here to, and there are 3 billion gamers playing games in virtual environments, by the way, multi-tens of billions of dollars of revenue being generated in those environments. So on the enterprise front, retail, manufacturing, real estate, healthcare, education, logistics, financial services, there are tremendous use cases leveraging this technology for all kinds of great things like learning and development and training, factory floors, supply chain. So can you share a little bit in your travels on what you're seeing out there, perhaps a sector and a use case where
Sure.
they're getting real business value from this technology?
Well, I think you touch on it, is anytime you can find a cost efficiency or a productivity benefit to simulate the behavior rather than doing it in real life, like you gave the example of the flight simulator, and that time is really expensive in that simulator. So if you have the buttons and you can learn and touch it offline, but it still feels somewhat like the real thing, there's a real key benefit to that. And you can extrapolate that to almost every industry.
Yeah.
Needs some degree of
Yeah.
touch point. That's what you work on every day, right?
Yeah. We've spent the last 12, 16 months or so working with on a cabin crew training platform, which is it's a multi-device, multi-screen platform. But the whole initiative was built on the idea that, they had downsized their staff from about 100,000 to 40,000 over COVID, and they needed to hire and train staff as fast and efficiently as possible. And having spent 150 nights in Dubai last year, when you go through their physical training facilities, they're, as you would imagine, some of the best in the world, but they're still physically limited on time and space and people and expertise, and they can't train cabin crew fast enough. And these are folks that are coming in from all over the world that have to move into a new environment. They have to understand what the culture of that place is, what the culture of the business is, what they're going to expect as they onboard into the new housing and what life's going to be like there. But also they have to launch into an intensive 44-day training program.
And that cash register is ticking every
day.
second of every day.
And most of the time spent is theoretical knowledge. It's like in a classroom, and it's a stack of PDF papers. It's boring. So what we worked on is trying to figure out how can we offload some of this theoretical knowledge into a virtual twin, digital twin of A380, where we've got multi-user collaborative training that can happen either self-guided or guided, and eventually scored out through an LMS. And again, if we can get 5 or 10% more throughput on the facility, then that frees up their people to spend more time with people, which is really important, and gives access to these experiences which would otherwise be limited to the last 3 or 4 days of training, essentially.
Awesome.
I break it down to a couple of different areas. One would be, and some of them have been discussed, but just to overview the areas. One would be if it's a dangerous experience. So whether that's learning about
Firefighting, maybe.
firefighting, or even changing gas on an aviation aircraft. If it's shooting simulation, anything that would be dangerous to put somebody in who hasn't already started to learn what that's about, it could be beneficial to do it in a virtual environment or simulated environment. That's one. Two, where seeing it in 3D, and maybe the object is far away or expensive, whether that's automotive, and so you're creating the entire vehicle. But so anything but seeing in 3D would make more sense than just seeing it on a flat screen. That would be another bucket. A third, and some of these somewhat overlap with each other. And then a third would be if it is expensive, and that could be expensive because of the type of materials they're working with, or that could be expensive because of the travel that needs to happen. We worked with a client who had a helicopter training session in center, and it was only in one place in the world. So everyone in the world had to go to that one place every time. And then the fourth would be around interpersonal skills. So there's a lot of training that happens, and you might role play, you might do it on a computer, but you might the person might be concerned about saying the wrong thing, would rather do it in a
Part of my
simulated
remit,
environment, first off. There's so much data around this.
Yeah, we're actually testing the combination of both spatial, virtual, and generative AI and building to help with, let's say, the sales process, how to engage in a client, or for HR folks to interview or have the tough conversation with the employee with a virtual person that looks real. It's a much more effective way than just reading text on how to handle this situation. Experiencing it firsthand virtually is powerful.
Yeah.
Anyone,
So to that point, people retain about 5% when they read, 10% when you're listening to a presentation. So all of the pearls of wisdom here, everyone in the audience will only retain the 10%. So pick your 10% wisely, and then it's up to about 75% if you actually have that experience, whether it's physical or digital.
It's pretty amazing stuff for sure. By the way, anyone that was at GTC in San Jose last year, he made a statement in his keynote. He said 90 to 100% of all manufacturing in the next 5 years will be conducted in a virtual digital twin environment. Right. So on that note, we talked a little bit about the enterprise use cases. What are some of the challenges there getting this stuff, the technology itself, into the organization? The IT guys don't really, in many cases, don't get it, having been a recovering IT guy. I got it when I was there, but most don't get it. So how does this come into the organization? How does this come into enterprise operations and what have you? And with that, what are the opportunities for those companies, and what are the challenges in getting this technology adopted and really getting real business value from it?
Well, I think a lot of this conference, probably one of the thematics of this conference is real innovation happens on the edge, right? It doesn't kind of happen in the gushy center. It happens in the more exploratory, experimental zones that then eventually finds its way into the day-to-day use and becomes kind of the normal day-to-day business of whatever corporation that is. I see that in pretty much every industry, that these devices have to have a very strong reason and strong impetus and a strong call to action to convince IT and management that it's worth spending the money and the time to do it. Now, the good news is, over a fairly short period of time, the cost of these devices is really, lowering and normalizing quite a bit, right? And the cost of deploying them, because of the sophistication of what IoT is now, is just another computer. So the great thing about the Apple device, because it lives in an Apple ecosystem, is if you're in an Apple organization, right? So I work in the movie business. We're primarily Mac in our world, other than a few sort of subject matter folks that live on the PC side. They like the idea that it's just another Mac, and it really is just another Mac. Like, you put it on your face, and it's a Mac on your face.
Same OS, same I/O.
Connects to the Wi-Fi the same way. It finds your credentialing the same way. It links to your email the same way. It's just an extension of that walled garden, which is, of course, what Apple wants to do to keep building their business, and that makes it viable and easy and logical. And I think that's why you're kind of going to see more enterprise adoption of that, at least in certain industries that live more on the Mac side than the PC side.
In the past few years, there's been sort of a lack of devices that are both seen as enterprise friendly, as based on where they're made or who that made them, or whether or not IT wants to plug the devices from those owners into where they are. So that certainly has been one issue. Another issue is in terms of, yes, it starts on the edge, but moving from that champion and that POC to something broader, and bringing that and having companies that see that real use case and are able to build for it and scale it in a speedy and fast way. The other thing, I think that a lot of the products have been sold either the software or the hardware, and most of the people on the enterprise side want it together. They want a bundle. They want a solution, a total solution for whatever the problem that they're attacking is, and that hasn't been in many cases how it's been sold.
Well, it's not bringing in headsets. It's about solving real business problems, whether it's manufacturing, revenue growth, retention, customer, whatever it is. That's first, and how does this headset with the software built around it provide those business outcomes is the issue, right?
Well, I think too, it's, a lot of this, kind of chasing the shiny object over the last few years, you can get prototypes built, but you're not going to get anything that's ready really for commercialization, so it's hard to be able to prove out business value. So a lot of the times when we're talking with customers now, it's like, this needs to be truly a cornerstone, 3 to 5 year, 5 to 7 year commitment, because you're going to learn a lot, right? And that is going to require a commitment to, constantly kind of tweaking, innovating, and creating new content. But I can also speak being on the SaaS side that, just getting inside and working in an enterprise environment, we'll spend more time just waiting on setting up authentication than we would anything else, and it's painful at best.
The other interesting parallel you can use from an enterprise standpoint is the evolution of the mobile environments into corporate America, into various corporations, is pretty much a parallel to this, right? Like, with the beginnings, there was the BlackBerry was kind of the thing that everybody used, and then there was kind of this undercurrent of, well, we don't really want to use a BlackBerry anymore. We want to use these newfangled iPhones and Android phones, but IT and enterprise was like, we've just figured out how to get the BlackBerries working and properly doing email protocols and so forth and so on. But very quickly, there was so much demand for the new device, for the thing that didn't have the physical keyboard and a different sort of user experience, that IT had to sort of acquiesce. And it's like, we have to figure this out. And then they did. It took a few years, and then they figured it out. And everybody uses it now across the board, right?
So on that note, could spatial and virtual reality get to that level of employee demand whereby the organization has to then switch from BlackBerry to iPhone, which they did. I lived through that.
Yeah.
And many others where, like Slack even being brought into an organization.
Yeah, exactly.
So much pushback from that product, but the demand was so great, the organization had to adopt it. So how does spatial and VR get there?
Well, I think the answer is yes, and I think it just has to have enough of a delta between what you do on normal 2D compute to generate and show enough value and enough kind of traction, right? And I think our friend from Apple were pretty good examples of like, these are the things that make sense. Does it really make sense to do a Zoom call in an Apple Vision Pro or a Quest? Kinda, but not really. Like, you get the sort of same experience.
The delta's not there to justify the cost of it.
It's interesting to do it in a Vision Pro, and if you've got a spatial presentation where you've got a 3D model, it's actually really great. But for the most part, people are looking at talking heads, right? And spreadsheets and other kind of 2D information. When it starts to become a spatial thing, so auto design is a really big deal. Anybody doing product work, like they showed the example of the sneakers. When you're actually studying a product, figuring out, what does this product look like and feel like? Like, I think there's a great thing for any of you that have a Apple Vision Pro or have access to it. There's an immersive video. Most of it is actually very 2D and normal. Like, it's not anything that extends the boundaries of immersive, but there's a few sections where they do a gallery of their products. These are very high-end, very expensive products, and because of the fidelity of the device and how well-tuned the device is to that type of customer, a luxury customer, you can look at these purses and shoes and belts and things that are super high fashion quotient, and you really want to see the fabrics and the stitching and the refinement of those products. And spatial is a way better way to do that than a 2D computer, so it helps the sales cycle. It's like, if you're going to buy something for $7,000, you want to know that it's worth $7,000, right?
Sure. The art world explored that with $20 million sculptures also.
So I think that's a really good use case.
Real estate is another example.
Walkthroughs of houses, a high-end real estate.
That you in many cases, you might not be able to go
to do it yourself, right?
Or you're checking an architecture review and seeing what's been done since you were last there.
So there's a confluence again of spatial and AI, perhaps, and a few other technologies. What happens when you combine AI and Gen AI now, bundle that within this? Like, then what are the use cases that now be afforded that you couldn't do before, that now with Gen AI being much more available and accessible without data scientists and what have you? Like, what does that convergence mean to this whole segment?
There's lots of aspects that are important. One, of course, is around generating the world, generating the environment, generating the content. So when you have generative AI, makes that a lot easier, more affordable, and which has been, in some cases, a barrier for adoption.
So developing the content in that virtual world, now you can do it real time with a prompt in your virtual world. You can create your own whatever. Right.
Yeah, and I'll come back to the A380 example. Is you might have 1 million unique models inside of an A380, from anything that you would find on the plane that would be interacted with. All of those things need to be programmed, right, with respect to physics, space, and time. But with Gen AI, being able to go in through prompting and be able to create new training scenarios, because this is one of the hard things, is right. So how do we create 1,000 different modules that might only need to be a few minutes long each, but do that at scale, right? We're not need to be able to go in and have to program all of this stuff. But once you've got the base model and you've got the base physics set, and then you can start to script out new interactions. I mean, they have, at Immersive, there's 1,000 challenges that come in throughout the day. I've watched the tickets come in, and it's how do you perform the perfect service in an imperfect world, right? So being able to simulate that chaos quickly will extend training beyond what they can traditionally do.
More predictive, perhaps.
Yeah.
More personalized 7 Ps as they go.
Yeah, I mean, in our world, in the entertainment space, we look at, there's a kind of a dividing line where we call before final pixel and then final pixel. So before final pixel is all the productivity space. Our friend from the audio world was talking a lot about that. Like the things that we do every day that require a lot of manual processes, they're somewhat laborious, they're somewhat archaic, and we can modernize all those, and we can use AI and spatial to kind of accelerate that, to sort of like supercharge all that. And really, at this stage of the equation, with a fairly limited exception, we're all sitting on this side of that fence. We're all sitting on the do it for all the stuff you need to do before any consumer gets their eyes on it. Once consumers get their eyes on it, you start to enter into the concerns around IP and ownership and creative control, and that's still kind of being figured out. So there's a lot of internal experimentation, but really nothing external. The external side is people in our production community using these tools and seeing acceleration and benefit from these tools on things they just kind of don't want to do anyway.
Yeah.
They would rather have a compute system handle some of that sort of grunt work.
Right, which
trouble work.
which AI and Gen AI specifically is going to
absolutely.
be addressing for sure. So we're almost out of time here. I'm going to stop maybe asking these questions on the monitor and see if the audience has any questions for the panel. Yes, sir.
Put it out.
Mr. Brill.
What we're talking about are a lot of edge cases, right? We're going to sell $7,000 things. We're going to do high-end real estate, which is slightly less of a use case. We're going to figure out how to do training for $250 million pieces of equipment like aircraft. When you move this down to the consumer scale, or the prosumer scale, or the SMB scale, what are the use cases that we're going to start to see over the next 3-5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can use kind of the YouTubing of the world as a good example of that. As you democratize the tool set and brought the cost of production, post-production, and distribution down to effectively zero, like we've been talking around the conference today, is, as the technology curve pushes that down, you get this explosion of content, extraordinarily low-cost content that has very unique audience desire points, right? Very different than big movies and television. And it's a gigantic industry now. I think one of the challenges is the bulk of that business has been 2D video or audio, right? Because 3D assets and 3D creation has largely been expensive, custom, and troublesome. And now what we're seeing with a combination of AI, game engines, better tool sets, is you're starting and templating, right? There's lots of templates that you can start with and build things. Sort of like how the websites were really hard and then templates came along. It was like, oh, websites are pretty easy now. 3D is entering that realm. You probably have some talking points on this too, where we're lowering the bar of entry very quickly. And a lot more people can enter into that fray and build creative content. So you're going to have the hits of tomorrow, just like the YouTube hits of today. These giant YouTube influencers didn't exist a generation ago. You're going to have 3D artists on the level of a Spielberg level creation without that kind of budget and without that kind of sophistication.
You have that, and then also as the headsets become more and more like the glasses you're wearing today, but with much higher function than what the glasses have today, you have the convergence of both of those, and then that's where it starts hitting the mass market.
But what I saw when we looked at the Apple Vision Pro and their 4 use cases, those are the same 4 use cases we were talking about. Those are the same 4 use cases we were talking about
Yes.
in the early
That's true.
1990s and
Yes.
DARPA
That's true.
funding. So we're
Because
still
those are the
talking about
sensible
same
use cases. That's what actually makes sense, right?
So what are the applications as this cost reduces? It still becomes the question, right? Like, are they for my plumber? Are they for, like what are those, what's the Uber? What's the Uber moment?
You want to take that, Jeremy? Is that your?
I mean, that's a great question.
And obviously, if you knew the answer, you'd be making that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, for us, I mean, the Uber moment happened, for Fortnite, when the Travis Scott concert went off and there was 20 million people, all in line watching, interacting, and, there was a lot of commerce transacted. that blew everyone's mind. I mean, that's what kind of spurred on a lot of the spatial computing conversations that we're still having today. The challenge is
Gaming.
Gaming is tough. It's just like creating a beautiful movie. Especially CGI. It's still very laborious, and it still takes a lot of creative and a lot of human touch. So trying to get scale on that, right now, it's not quite there.
But spatial is still exotic, right? It still feels exotic. It's still costed as exotic. But it's also like we're seeing the breakpoints in that all the time. Like I do this podcast every week and we talk about XR. And we had the developer of an indie game, single guy, called Gorilla Tag. It is the phenomenon of the year in VR, right? It's made a ridiculous amount of money for this one person to the point where he's had to hire this huge staff now, and his whole business has changed. But that only happened in the YouTube world and was very hard to happen in the spatial world. And now we're actually starting to see that with the lowering of the cost of these tools and the spatial kind of products becoming more proliferated, that you're going to have these hits. Like I gave the point that he's kind of the Blair Witch of virtual reality.
Yeah.
Cost nothing to make it, became humongous.
We had Beat Saber though doing the same thing a few years ago.
Yeah.
I think so. It's not. It's but there's still outliers that are out there, really capturing the zeitgeist and hitting that scale, and that scale still is at the scale of about like a PlayStation. So it's significant, and there's still a ways to grow to be fully mass market.
And it's still early, right? This was Apple's first release of the first product gen. And I'm going to go on record here and say by this time next year on this stage, we're going to announce something with them that we're going to do that might be that killer app.
Wow, Richard, that's
That's
big.
great.
That's
Yeah.
bold.
Yeah. I mean, I
And I love a challenge,
I think
so.
what's most exciting about the Apple entering the fray, we know that they've been working on it for years and years. As Mike said, he's been there quite a few years, but they've been acquiring companies and bringing in many of the best people in the industry, and the fact that they decided to finally launch the headset and put a stake in the ground, it's still a very, very early rendition. And the reason that the jobs to be done are similar to what they were in the past is because lots of those things are the ways that we as individuals live our lives and connect and create and learn. So there's still similar things that we do. But to me, the fact that they decided now is the time to come in shows their confidence in this industry, which to me is a huge sign of where this is going to go, because they look at things in the sort of Apple scale, and so that's where they're planning to take it, and that's where the industry will be going. And I think it's great for all of us who've been in the industry for many years, whether we're at various different companies. I think it's a rising tides moment.
So we're out of time. Great questions, Jonathan. Thank you. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their thoughts.
Thank you.
Really, really great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Scarf King.
Thanks, Josh.